Good day to everyone tuning in for another episode of MCL Talks, brought to you by the Manila Composers Lab. I am Juro Feliz, a composer based in Canada who will moderate today's discussion among lab members from different locations, including Jonas Baes, Alexander John Villanueva, and Pauline Therese Arejola from the Philippines, Feliz and Macahis from Austria, and Dominic Quejada from Germany. Now, we're quite happy to introduce our guest for today, who's joining us all the way from Freiburg in Germany. For this episode, we invite composer Johannes Schöllhorn to present and talk about his work. Now, just a little word about Johannes. Besides composing his own original works, he also works on different kinds of what he would call transcomposition, with music from the Renaissance until the music of today. Besides having his music widely performed in Europe and Asia, his musical endeavors brought him into conducting and teaching, in which he now serves as a composition professor and the director of the Institut für Neue Musik at the Musik Hochschule Freiburg. And so we welcome Johannes Schöllhorn here on the floor. Hi, Johannes.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I have before I start, I have a technical question. If I play music to you, do you hear it? If I just open my, what is it called? iTunes? Can you hear that? Or you can put it later into the thing and so on? Anyway, I would like to play one of the pieces. I don't know if you know the piece. I would like to talk about Anamorphose, which was a project starting in 2001 and finished around 2010. So it was quite a long time to write this big piece, because it's important maybe to compare with other versions and so on. Is that okay? Okay, I do. It's counterpoint number 9. You heard one of the movements of the piece for ensemble Anamorphose, And maybe you also got the score. You know that it is a piece for 12 instruments, 2 clarinets, that means clarinets and also playing bass clarinets, 4 brass instruments, that means a horn, trumpet, trombone, tuba, so quite heavy things, and a piano, an accordion, violin, viola, violoncello, and double bass, so 1 of each. I think it's good just to tell a bit the story about the piece. Why does someone start something like this? In 2000, around 2000, 2001, I was asked to write a theater music. That means the music for a theater play on a text by a French writer, Francis Ponge, which he is one of the writers around the surrealists in the beginning of 20th century. And it should become a theater play, which is based on a book which is called Comment une figue des paroles et pourquoi. That means like a fig, the fruit, the fig of words and why. So it's a quite strange title, and what happens in the book is that there is a poem about the fig, and Francis Ponge is rewriting this poem hundreds of times. And he's treating the fig like words, and the words like a fig, and is forming it like always in different shapes. So it's always the same subject, the fig, and it is but every version of the poem is different. And he himself compared this book to the Art of Fugue by Johann Sebastian Bach. And as you have heard, this was a kind of transcription of Contrapunctus number 9 of Art of Fugue by Bach. So this piece was, this music was meant to be part of a theater piece with the title L'art de la figue, which means the art of the fig, not the art of the fugue, which has also, as you know, if you're Italian, has some other connotations. Anyway, this was a strange music theater play for 1 actor, and the musicians should have been on stage. In this time, 20 years ago, there was this early computer technology where you had these glasses connected to a computer, and all the musicians could move on stage and could see on their glasses the scores and the conductor. So they can play and go around and play perfectly together because they see their parts and they see their conductor. So it is flexible in tempo. It was very, very modernist in that time, and it never took place. So I started to compose this music in 2001, and I composed 3 pieces, 3 movements, until 2003, and it was meant to be played by Ensemble Ictus in Belgium, and they played the premiere of these first pieces. Then there was a little break, and then I restarted and I wrote 6 more pieces. And until then, everything was together with the text. And then it was performed, and then it was forgotten. And in 2010, I decided to write 3 more movements, but without the thinking of the text, for Ensemble Moderne. And until then, it was simply an ensemble piece without text. So let's see, say 2/3 of the piece were performed with the text by Francis Ponge, like a melodram. And then the text disappeared because of many reasons. And then it became an ensemble piece. And it was first played in 2012, the first time in Munich, the entire piece. That means 1 hour, 20 minutes. So more than all the movements I sent you, because they are not on the CD yet. So there are 4 or 5 more movements. And then again, there was a little break. and then it was a kind of an explosion because almost everybody wanted to play this piece. So it started with Ensemble Intercontemporain, Ensemble Moderne remix, which made this CD, Philharmonia Orchestra in Seoul, everywhere, all over the world. And now it's played every year, many, many times. It's surprisingly, it became my most successful piece. And I had the chance, that's also nice, I had the chance to conduct this piece, or let's say in different versions to conduct this piece several times myself. The good thing is you can choose whatever you want. That means it is not an entire piece which has to last 1 hour and 20 minutes. It can be played, you can only choose one movement. So there is one piece just for piano solo, and a lot of pianists play just this piece, and the rest is, of course, not played. And sometimes they play one movement, sometimes they play 3 or whatever. So you can choose as you want, and you can also choose the order. It's not my decision. Anyway, it's not the order of Bach's piece, because even Johann Sebastian Bach didn't know the order of his pieces. So it is not about this. Hello again. Yes, what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you some other versions of Contrapunctus number 9. And I will not try to sing it for you, but I will try to describe the difference so that you have a kind of an image in your mind. That means the first example I wanted to show you is by Grigori Soholov, the famous Russian pianist. And that is what we normally think is Bach art of fugue. That means you see a black grand piano on stage, you see a pianist in his tuxedo, and he is playing art of fugue in tuning 440 or 443. But as we know, this is not art of fugue. This is 19th century, lasting into the 21st century, let's say. Because we know art of fugue is again, it's a myth. No, let's say it different. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, the son of Johann Sebastian Bach, tried to create a myth around this piece to sell it. First myth was that it is not written. We don't know for which instruments this piece has been written. This is a lie. It was absolutely written for a harpsichord, that's for sure. And he noted it also in this way. I think a lot of people didn't recognize this because he wrote the parts in 4 lines, but that was usual in that time. But it was no longer usual in 19th century, so they didn't know what does that mean anymore. But it is for harpsichord. Second myth is that Johann Sebastian Bach died during writing Contrapunctus number 14. This is wrong, because we know that we know a lot of things about Contrapunctus number 14. We know even how long this piece was meant to be, because Bach was always working in the same way, and there is just a page missing. And we know that Bach always finished the music at the end of the page, so we know how many bars would have been written. And we know that, for example, contrapunct number 10 is younger than number 14 because he used different paper. So it is to create a myth, a fragment. This was the idea of the aesthetics in this time. So if you have a fragment, it sells better. Okay. So for a long time, art of fugue was not played, but it was rediscovered in 20th century. And then a lot of people worked with it. For example, Hermann Scherchen. Maybe you heard the name Hermann Scherchen. He was mainly a conductor. And he made an orchestration of art of fugue. And this is more like the Stokowski orchestration style. That means you have 16 first violins, you have 14 second violins, you have around 3 flutes or 4 flutes, you have big brass, and it sounds like this. And this is my phone, and I try to ignore it. So now you know German telecom melodies. Okay, good. It has nothing to do with Bach. Okay, so try to imagine this movement you just heard before, not for a grand piano, but for a big, big, big orchestra, slower tempo, like do way, pa 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 pa, and like this, all the time. So this is more or less the style. It is beginning of 20th century. The third example I wanted to show you is by Rinaldo Rinaldini, an Italian musician, and he is doing this kind of historic performance praxis. So it would be almost half tone lower, and it would be a very small group playing this, very playful on old instruments. And you would not even recognize that it's the same piece, because it's really different kind of music. And the second last thing I wanted to play for you, and I recommend it too, is the version by the Swingle singers from the 60s and 70s in last century. So they sing dum dee da ba da ba doo 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 doo, and sing like that with the percussion and the bass, an E bass with it. And maybe this was the most influential piece for me working on art of Fugue. So this is a kind of a, how can I say? This is a kind of a, how do you say, kaleidoscope of different interpretations of the same music. In fact, I have to come back for one point. I have to come back to the instrumentation or orchestration of my piece, because I was asked. No, I was not first asked to do this. Another composer was asked to do the music for this theater piece, and he refused. He said, "No, I can't do it. But I know a crazy German composer who is ready to do this." And then they asked me, and they asked me to do not only a transcription or an orchestration of Art of Fugue, they asked me to do it with a tango orchestra. So that's why the accordion is in this group. And in a way, it is a hybrid group, because it's somehow the Middle European contemporary music ensemble, and on the other side, it is really a tango orchestra. There's just a guero missing and something like this. So I listened to a lot of tango in that time too, and there is a nice piece you can discover by Mussolini, which is called De Contrapunto, because tango is a hybrid music form. It is a mix of different influences of European music, but also of music from Argentina and from Italy, especially also. So there is a lot of influence, and that's what I like very much. And as you know, if you listen to my piece, you can hear that, I think. I would like to show you now. Should I just go on? Okay. I would like to show you now something. No, I come back. What does Bach do in his piece? It's very simple. He writes a piece for harpsichord, and he has always the same soggetto, the same melody, let's say, in the beginning, etc. So it is a weird program in a sense, because it should be very boring. Always the same soggetto, and always the same kind of contra soggetto, always in the same key, D minor. So if you are a composer, I would recommend not to do this, because it's a party killer. you should use different melodies, different sounds. Like we all composers always look for different materials, and Bach is showing us exactly the opposite. So, and then you write a piece which lasts more than 2 hours. Okay, good luck. But what is very important for me in this piece is it is all about fuga. Okay, we know what a fuga is, and we all try to do this, and we suffered and failed, etc. But the interesting point for me is that Bach is doing two things in the same time. On one hand, he's writing fugas, and with different aspects of fugas, so different kinds of imitation, counterpoint types, different number of voices, etc. But it's still, everything is a fuga. But in the same time, he's trying to do other things during writing a fuga. For example, the movement you heard just now, if you would not point out that it is a fuga, it sounds more like an Italian concerto. And there is counterpoint number 6, for example. He calls it in stilo francese, in French style. And this is a double fuga. It's quite complicated in contrapuntal sense, but in the same time, it's a French overture. That means he has everything of a French overture of an opera. And there is also there are other pieces. For example, one is just starting in D minor and going through all the keys of the scales, everything, and coming back to D minor. So he is much more interested in chromatic and modulation than in the fuga itself, etc., etc. He is also interested in different styles. That means he is sometimes writing a fuga in a style which was already almost 100 years old in his time. And in the same time, in other pieces, he's using a formal concept which he got from Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, which is much more modernist than the fuga construction. So what I like very much is that he is always in the same point. He has the same sachetto, but what he is doing, he is always looking from a different angle on this sachetto. So if you look at this hand from afar, you see something different as if you look at this hand from here. If you look at it like this, or if you look at this like this, you see different things, maybe birds or whatever. And that was very interesting for me because it helped me to make my transcompositions of this piece. And at a certain point, when I was discussing with my partners, we were comparing it with the principle in art, which is called anamorphose, and which gave at the end the title for this piece. And I would like to show you some of these anamorphoses. I have a little PowerPoint presentation. So now you see anamorphose, this is the title, and then you see some letters by a strange guy, Johannes Lenker, in 16th century, so much 100 years before Bach was born. And he does a game with his letters. And it's, if you read the first line, it's called perspectiva. So he's playing with the perspective of these letters. It is a time just after the invention of book printing, so they were very fond about what they could do with letters. My second example is a small drawing by Leonardo da Vinci. If you see the upper side, you see some lines which could be like a tomb or a small landscape. But if you compress it, and you see it on the bottom, if you compress it, you see that it is an eye and a face. That is what's happening when you have an anamorphotic view. If you look at it from the front, you see something different as if you look at it from the side, which means that you compress the vertical dimension. Another very, very important and famous example, you see the Ambassadors by Hans Holbein, a big painting which is you can find in London. And you see these two ambassadors, these kind of very arrogant guys, and you see at the bottom, at the feet of them, you see a strange form, and normally you don't see what it is, but if you turn the painting, which you see in the middle, you can see that it is the skull of someone. And so it has a hidden meaning, kind of a memento mori. Think of that you can die. I just go on. This is another example. I skip it. And this is a nice thing. It is a kind of a game, because in this time they didn't have TV sets or internet, so they had to spend their time in the evening by doing games. And this is an anamorphose game. So you have two things. You have a cylinder with a mirror on it, and you have a drawing. If you look at the drawing or painting, quite often you don't see what is on the painting, but if you put the mirror and the cylinder with the mirror in the center, you can see that there are figures or something else. For example, here you see a guy with a hat, but if you look on the bottom, maybe you don't see it immediately. That was funny for people in the 16th and 17th century. Or for example, this nice example, it shows Adam and Eve. So Adam is on the left side, Eve is on the right side, and on the top you see kind of the apple is missing. This is a guy who was compressed in a different way. And here you see a modern example. You see on the left side the result. On the right side you see the making of. You see the camera, and you see what the photographer had to do just to hide the chair in the photography. And another example, from one point of view, you see a couple of things. On the left side, you see a couple of elements hanging in the air, or seemingly hanging in the air. If you walk a bit around the castle, you see that it becomes one form, a completely perfect mathematic form. The same thing at a wall in England. If you look at it from one angle, you see, oh, it's a kind of a cubist object. If you look at it from a stranger angle, you just see that it's a painting or a design of a ship on the wall. And here, this is a nice video by Bernard Prat, and I show you what is going to happen. This is another one. I'm skipping this because you would need a good sound for that. And this is a trailer, but I skip it too because it was about a version with a dance company with the anamorphose, and I wanted to show you the trailer, but it doesn't make sense in the moment. I can send it to you later. Okay. So now here you see the beginning of Contrapunctus number 4. in old keys. Don't worry, I'm going to explain it. And this was the way how Bach wrote this piece. And on the bottom, you see what I made out of it. So there's the same amount of bars, and you can see the soggetto is almost disappearing. It is appearing in the accordion, but let's say in 2 octaves higher, and every note appearing is sustained. So it becomes a sound in the accordion which sounds more like a Japanese sho than an accordion sound, or like a very high organ sound. And so you get a kind of tonal cluster until bar number 4, because all the pitches are added one after the other. And then the contrasoggetto is starting, but the first note is omitted because the first note, the D, is already in the chord. And then I slowly start to put it down and down and down, and all the notes appearing in the contrasoggetto are now appearing in viola and then in violin, etc. And for this piece, I made a weird decision, because I said, apart from piano, all the other instruments are playing the notes D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, and D again. So they have all the instruments, apart of piano, have 7 notes, and the piano has the rest. So the ensemble is playing without the piano, is always playing in D minor, and the piano is playing all the chromatic notes in between. So that's why the C sharp, not C sharp, the G sharp and the C sharp are played by piano in bar number 5, bar number 6, and the C sharp is played in bar number 8, and the B natural is played in bar number 8 by the piano. So the character and the situation has completely changed, because we have a kind of a field, and we have a long sustained notes throughout the whole piece. It is quite meditative and lasts 10 minutes. So it is maybe 4 or 5 times longer than the original. And we have always the situation that the notes which don't fit into D minor are played by the piano. But there is a nice modulation within the piece. That means in the second half, suddenly we are in F sharp minor. That's the key Bach uses. And then the piano is playing almost all the keys, and the others have no keys to play. So it is also changing the orchestration by itself. The system is changing the orchestration. So this is one of the principles. This is one way of an anamorphotic view on Bach's piece. The second example is completely different. You have this canon in hypodiapason, which means octave and a fifth. And when I sing this melody, for me, it's very, very fast and very energetic. And I tried to do something completely different, and it was a big challenge to do this for a big ensemble, although it's not only 2 voices. So every element of this piece is cut in very, very small pieces. It's the absolute contrary to the other piece I showed you before. So what you can see is the first note, the A, is just in the piano. It's like a very sharp attack, very, very high. Then we have this and so on. And I cut this in small, small pieces and gave it to the strings, the pizzicati. And if there is a D, for example, appearing, the first D is in a viola. The second D appearing in this line is in the cello, but 1 octave lower. The third D is in double bass, again 1 octave lower. So this figuration D, ledi, is jumping up and down throughout the whole ambitus, and is cut in pieces, which creates not only different registers, it also creates new rhythms, because if you sing the violin now, it makes one ba ba da da ba da. So you get some kind of jazzy rhythms in one voice, but another voice has a different rhythm, etc. It is just, the tuba is helping for this and making a kind of energy in bar 2. And then you have horn, trumpet, and trombone playing the same notes, but not in the same way and not in the same register. So always one instrument is holding the note. First is trombone holding the B, then horn holding the A, and then trumpet in B holding the sounding G. So you get a kind of spatial effect, although they only play the same notes. Then I took this G of the end as a kind of upbeat, like a tutti upbeat, which is played by the brass instruments and clarinet and strings, which is of course not in Bach's music, but gives a kind of kick to the F in the piano. And then again, the F is short, but the accordion is holding it. And then you get this uprising ba-da-di in the piano. And then second voice is coming in, and it is starting from the other side of the ambitus. So it's very low register in piano, and so on and so on. And then you can, for example, you can see different principles, like in the last bar, you see pa-pam, 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 or pa-para, 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 pa-pam. So the repetition is always in the piano, but the other notes are in the strings, but in 2 different registers in the same time. So, and I could go on, and every bar in this piece has a new rule or a new way to interpret the text by Bach. So it is exactly the opposite from Contrapunctus number 4, which is one rule throughout the whole piece. And here I have one rule maybe only for, let's say, 1/8 note, or one rule for 1 bar or 2 bars. What I did, I had an idea for each movement. For example, for this movement, I decided I will not have an idea for the whole movement in general, apart from the idea that I don't have an idea for the whole movement in general. That means whatever occurs, I take it. But it is not always the same thing. Some movements have a kind of a development, like counterpunct number 6 and so on. You can find out, you can easily hear what I am doing then, if you listen to the music. I would like to talk a bit about, let's say, high and low culture, or let's say pop and classic music in a different way. I did not care about the fact that everybody thinks Art of Folk is a piece of very high cultural developed music for people in well-dressed and so on. I didn't take care about this. I was not interested in it. I always thought, because there was a myth also about this piece, that it even should not be played. It is so, let's say, holy that people should only read this piece or play it in very like church-like context. But when I played and listened to this music, I always thought it's so playful, it's so dancing all the time. I should show this, and that's why I opened the door also for something like Swinger Singers, which is pop music. And because there are so many energies in different places of the world, of our musical world, that I decided, okay, this is also an aspect of anamorphose. That means not kicking people out or saying this should not be allowed to enter into this music, because I couldn't stand it. The music told me, let it in. What can I do? Bach is stronger. That is one point. And another point is, what is transcomposition? Recently, one of my students told me, you're the only guy using this word. Maybe I'm not, I don't know. In fact, I did not invent it. It was given to me by the actual director of Donaueschingen Musiktage, and he said, you're doing transcomposition. And I said, okay, what is this? Yes, you're right. I like the word, and I'm thankful that he gave me this word. I think it is really on the point. It's because it's not orchestration. It is not just doing something, adding something. It is transcomposition means there is a transfer from one point to another, but in the same time, it's really composition. Of course, I can't do it without, in this case, without someone like Johann Sebastian Bach. I need a partner. But not every music is a good partner. And I would not choose every music. So I can tell you, for example, I would never choose Schubert Winterreise to give a famous example, because someone else did this piece in a transcomposition. I would never choose this piece. I can also explain why. But transcomposition means I accept this composer, and somehow I think I support this composer, because I want to become this music alive in a way like I want to become it alive. That means there is no contradiction between Bach and me. I don't see it, because the original, the so-called original, is always there. But I can tell people something through this music, because it is like a means also to talk about history in music, and not in a sense that I think music is a museum. Although this word has the same etymology, I think music is never a museum. It is something alive. It has to be brought to life. And if we keep it as we think or suppose it was in the past, we will fail. So I think interpreting music always in a new way is necessary, that this music stays alive. So it is a different point of view of, to say the dangerous word, tradition. Because what tradition normally means is keep it as it is. Okay, put it into the museum and let it be like it is. But I think this is the wrong way of tradition. I'm more with Gustav Mahler. I like the fire, not the ashes. And I like the fire of the past. That's very important. Yes, this is more or less what I wanted to show you. I would have shown you other things, because I had recently, last year, I had the wonderful chance to work with a famous dance group, the Frankfurt Dresden Dance Company. It's a group of 30 dancers, and they did a big performance in Frankfurt on this piece. And I wanted to show you this video, but it doesn't make sense if you don't hear the music. So it was a very good experience, because from the very beginning, I always thought that this piece is a piece for dance, and because I think Bach is dancing. And this was after many years, after 19 years, it was the opportunity, or to see it with real dancers. And so this was yeah, it's a happy moment in the life of a composer. If something like that what you wish to happen really happens after so many years. So it is a long time, 19 years. Yes, I think it's I think I have put so many things on the table. Maybe it's the moment for a discussion, isn't it?
Yes, totally. And I can actually try to summarize all of that. So we actually have talked about many processes regarding the creation of this piece, right? From it being a melodrama of some sort, so just like being music, from the inclusion of text to just like not including text, and in a way it actually also emphasizes the modular aspect of anamorphose, where people can actually interpret this in many ways, including movements and even not including certain movements. And it also so it also results into different versions. And we also talked about the myths about the art of fugue, of Bach's art of fugue, and different stylistic renditions, which actually also reflected in the way this composition actually existed, especially with renditions of Contrapunctus 9. And talking about Bach with the same, using the same melody and doing other things, and eventually cultivating this idea of anamorphosis and many ways of doing it musically. In a way, this work also demonstrates the aesthetic of actually like presenting a subject and hereby actually making it disappear in the process. And I would actually put it in that way. We also talked about high and low culture, where it's not like doing transcomposition is actually not about addressing the boundaries of high and low culture, but it's also just about um, making music alive versus the idea of keeping tradition, and that transcomposition is not orchestration, as Johannes have said, but it's really a transference of media and also a form of curation, which by in which by you see the work of the composer and the agency of the composer in doing this kind of thing. So we will open the floor now for discussion.
Everybody,
I have a question. Should I just go ahead?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. I like the concept. I have to say it's not a new concept to me, but it's a new word to me. And whenever you hear an idea articulated in a word, it's always a great moment, I think. I like the potential for multifaceted meaning and interpretation. But I noticed that in all of the examples that you presented of anamorphotic things, they always seem to require a correct perspective. And the fascination always seems to come from this transformation from something that's incomprehensible to something where you suddenly see the subject. And you always attain that by attaining this correct perspective, which I found disappointing. Is this a necessity in this concept? And is this the case with your music at all?
It's a very good point. It's not the case in the music, because I think I added something to. I lose something using the word anamorphotic perspective, and I win something. I lose the correct version because I don't believe in it. And I win something because I win the possibility to look at things from different perspectives. That's the only point. It is, of course, the problem is, I was thinking about why did the anamorphose in art history not become a famous technique? It became somehow a famous technique in 20th century, but it became famous in the moment where it was more kind of an abstract art. So it lost again something because the object. There are some interesting examples, but I think, well, if you think about art history and European art history especially, we find that one of the most important things, what everybody is saying about art history, is central perspective. So there is always a center. That means in music, there is always the central key, like C major, for example. So this is in a way the same thing in music, what is happening in painting. And I think they only use the anamorphose in this, the way you pointed it out, to come back to the real thing, Because if they would have thought about it profoundly, what it means to have different angles, they would lose, of course, the central perspective. And this is the very interesting thing what I'm interested in. So what happens if we lose the central perspective? And because that is what happens in a way today, because we are living in a globalized world and not everybody in the world is believing in central perspective. This is a Western concept. If you work on, or if you know Chinese painting, which is much older, of course, than European ones, you don't have central perspective. And sometimes you have it, but it's not the only principle ruling everything. And that is also something which is, I think, deep in the idea of European music. In musical terms, there are some aspects which are really very much related to central perspective, to one point of view. And I don't want to kick all of them out, but in a way, the anamorphosis, or this my way of working with this piece, is for me, it's a possibility to point out, okay, it could be different. I know it's not a new concept, but it's also, as we know, with all tools, it depends of how you use them. So that is a kind of answer. I feel sad that the anamorphosis is more about anecdotic things.
Yeah, I would even say probably, and add to that too, that even geographer Doreen Massey actually talked about space a lot. She actually built a huge discourse on space, and it's really like this idea of decentralization in regards to like history making. She actually elaborated that historicizing something is also a process of deadening of space itself. But at the same time, it also opens up this idea where we multiple spaces actually happen at the same time, and it highlights the fact that history is actually never a process of centralization where it's just like one history or the other.
Yeah.
But given this consistent trend of decentralization, don't we lose coherence? And should we mourn that loss?
Of course, we lose certain kinds of coherence. Of course. But, if someone pretends to have the way, do we really want this kind of coherence? No, I don't think so. I think what we have to learn is that there are different coherences and that they should interfere and that we should not pretend to have the one and the others are wrong. The problem is that the idea of central perspective for me is, or this kind of thinking, just pretends to be the one kind of coherence. But there are many others. And that's what I learned in many years. So I don't think that of course we always lose something, but we can win something. And maybe for our future is more important to lose sometimes coherence than to win, than to straighten everything, because that's what happens in our world anyway all the time, as we know.
Thank you very much. I like playing devil's advocate. It's fun. Next question.
Well, I can also even probably like think about non-musical events, like here in North America, for example. When we talk about the loss of coherence, it's already a matter of fact that issues about police brutality, for example, has exemplified a lot of incidents where we cannot solely rely on the idea of policing as it is right now, right? And so many initiatives in North America, specifically in the United States, they are already like trying to like deal away with these kinds of oppressive processes and all that. So in a way, that just this discussion just reminds me suddenly of real life events too.
Yeah.
I have a very significant. First and foremost, thank you very much, Johannes. I must be one person who really believes how your work can impact very much the next generation of composers, especially in our country, in the Philippines, because of our historical or colonial experience and how even this notion of transcomposition can be a very significant approach to how we deal with our own, how we deal with making sense out of our colonial experience and the future. I'm just talking about AJ Villanueva as an example, but and this politics of perspective. But my first comment and question about anamorphose is that here you present your anamorphose of aspects of Bach's Kunstfuge. But isn't this kind of reception already existing when a listener tries to incorporate the experience of, let's say, any rendition of Bach's Kunstfuge with his experience? I mean, I value very much your creation as opening up this phenomenon, and that in presenting, so we see how, for example, this phenomenon of anamorphosen makes the visual experience, for example, temporal, so that even the thing is very much highlighted in your anamorphosen of Bach's Kunstfuge. Is it right to think that this is your transformation in your head, and we as listeners are going to experience your transformation, but this can never be anyone else's but yours? Is it the right way of looking at it, or were you looking into the potential of other people or listeners creating their own anamorphosen of your work?
Well, this is a question about how about reception, how people perceive, or perception. It is, of course, everybody perceives a music differently. That's always, and this is also the case when people listen to my version of this art of fugue. Of course, people listen to it in a different way. It also has to do with the fact where they come from, how they were educated, and so on. Of course, I know also, I want to show my ideas which come to me when I work on this piece. That's very simple. I just want to show them. So I know everybody else would do something different, and of course, each listener listens to it in a different way. That's always the case. Nothing more to say. It's like this.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yes. That was what I was trying to find out. I was trying to see if there is also this consciousness. Yeah, because I could play a let's say another Bach fugue, for example. Let's say from the musical offering, musicalities offer, and for example, the canons, the very complex canons there, and I could see it as a homophonic. If I didn't know the canon in that sense, I would see it as a homophonic structure, or I could see it as the way Bach has constructed it as a canon itself, and in that way, my experience is shaping it. But if I listen to your anamorphose, this is your transformation of Bach's Kunstfuge, which I am experiencing, and which again I am transforming in my own reception. I'm just very interested in reception right now, in this because it's part of a study I'm doing at the moment regarding reception and in that sense. So.
Yeah, I can say two things. First of all, it was never my idea to work on all the movements of Bach's Art of Fugue. So I just read the piece and I decided to take the movements which told me something. But in fact, not only they told me something, I told them something. So that's why I chose them. And I was never interested in having a kind of a order which looks like the old order. And about perception of other people, I remember very well when it was first played by Philharmonia Orchestra in London, this piece. Someone wrote a program note. And he wrote, the first sentence in the program note was, he killed the holy cow. So it told me a lot about how people perceive this piece. It is the holy cow. And in fact, I added one sentence. I said, yes, I killed the holy cow and I eat it. I'm eating it. So that is maybe can show how my concept or my idea about this piece. Of course, I know that it is a holy cow. And I can tell you, zero, none of the German Baroque music festivals ever was interested to play this piece.
Okay.
And there were many attempts by different famous ensembles to do this from Germany and from other countries. None of the Germans ever played this music. So just telling you something about perception.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Hey, still within the line of perception. Well, before I go there, I know a couple of things now from you. Transcomposition is actually something that I have first encountered from you with the music that we performed in Hong Kong way back in 2015, the Piero Lunaire, and when we went back to Manila the year after that, we did this. Well, I wrote transcomposition things. I usually call it, for lack of better term, I called it orchestration or quotation, you know. But yeah, transcomposition. And I've wrote a lot of these works before, recently actually, and I'm actually interested in perception because is there an intention to present us with something that sounds quite familiar, and because it is back, it is familiar, and for example, the Piero Lunaire, it is kind of familiar. I didn't know the music before, but the familiarity of the tonality and the direction of the text and the phrasing and everything is kind of familiar. So is there an intention to present us with the familiar, and at the end of it breaking our minds and present just what you said, the holy cow, and giving that to us so that we could eat it ourselves? So is there an intention to do that?
Well, I think I'm not. I don't want to destroy things. It's not about destroying. It is. I don't just take a cup of tea and smash it. It is not that. It is more like opening something up and showing other aspects of this thing, or also showing that something which seems to be sometimes somehow almost dead in history, that there is a potential that it can open up. And it is also a means, if I work in this way, it is a means to show a distance. That means it is to show also that, let's say, tonality, certain kind of notations, etc., are not nature. They are cultural products. So they were built, but they can also get lost or transformed, and so on. And they are not the means, because there is a tendency that we think, okay, tonality is everywhere, so it is the music. It is not. So that's one of the ideas about this. And it is also to make people aware, because this is fun for me. It's not just, I'm not a teacher, I'm not this in this way. I have no pedagogic idea. It is more the interest that I think, okay, it has much more perspectives and much more sides than people think. And people tend to lose or to forget things. So, for example, people forget that the music of Franz Schubert, for example, was not possible without the music in the bars and on the streets. So they think it's concert hall music, but it's not true. And I think it's a pity, because sometimes the music on the streets and in the bars, as we all know, is much more interesting than the music in the concert hall. So why not saying it? And I want to say it not because I'm a teacher or I'm educating people, because it's my desire. I prefer much more to be on the street or in the bar. And it can be in the same time very, very high and very developed culture. It can be very, very fine, refined. And that's my idea about this. It is not that I think I should do this because of this or that. You mentioned the Pierrot Lunaire. It was a funny thing, because in that time when I was asked to do this piece, I was asked to do an orchestration, but in a way I could not resist. So I started to compose into this music. I started to change this guy, Max Kowaiski, and to take out things I saw in the score, but he didn't compose them. So I could show them. And it was a question of desire, not a question of that I was thinking before. I know the concept is old, because one of my favorite composers is Luciano Berio, and he did in several works he did something like this. And I'm not interested if it's so new or not. I'm more interested in, if I want to do it, I do it. And then I am a composer and I'm an ignorant egoist. I think if I'm interested, the others might be interested too. So that's why I do it. And then if it works, it's fine. If not, oh.
Thank you. I like that it's fun. It actually translates to the performers as well, as much as it translates to the audience. Thanks.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense without fun or a desire. It doesn't make sense. Well, in German we have this word Sinn, which is in English sense. And this word Sinn has two meanings. That means Sinn means it makes sense, so it is reasonable in a way. On the other hand, Sinn is what I smell, what I taste, what I hear, what I see. These are the senses, Sinn. So, and they are not really well connected with my brain. They just tell me what to do.
I remember picking up from the Pierrot Lunaire of Kowalski, which you wrote for Pierrot Ensemble, because I performed that for my recital. Yeah, and I remember what you told me in our exchange of emails before. You said that when you were writing it, it was as if you were Pierrot in the process. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah.
Yes,
It was as if, yeah, and when you said that, my perspective on the music changed, because before I used to think that it was just the performers or the instrumentalists that portray the character, or the actual performance. But in the process of you transcomposing it or writing it again, then you said that it was as if you were Pierrot. It was your but you were trying to bring out the Pierrot character, that and the music sounds so different for me when I listen to the piano and the piano and voice version only. And yeah, I just remembered that part.
Yeah, that is well. I really think I try to behave or be Pierrot in this moment, and that changes the attitude as a composer. Because if you are the well-dressed composer looking at the piece from outside, then you're safe. You have your attitudes, which are safe, and then you approach everything what you encounter. You approach more or less in the same way. But Pierrot is a strange guy. He doesn't know from one second to another what is good or what is bad, what is right or wrong. So when you enter into a piece and you have this Pierrot attitude, and then suddenly something strikes you or hits you or something, you behave in a strange way, and you have suddenly ideas you would never have if you would look at it from outside. That's why a lot of things appear in the Pierrot linear, which also for someone from outside don't have anything to do with Pierrot. But it just came into my mind, and I trusted my instinct.
Yeah, and I think also as a performer, the performance was, I think, in a way a trans composition, or as a trans performance, because performing it with the piano is a very different experience. Performing it with this new version. So as a performer, like you have to also transkompose yourself.
Yeah. It is very funny that sometimes when you do things like this, for example, I did made a transcomposition of a piece by Gabriel Fauré, a piano piece for big orchestra and piano solo. It's a kind of piano concerto. It's 25 minutes long. I made this piece, and when you see the score, you think, okay, it looks very classic, very normal. And you think when an orchestra is going to play this, they just make a run through and then it's done. It was one of the rehearsals with maybe the most mistakes of an orchestra, because it looks quite regular, but there are slight differences, and that was a big irritation for the orchestra. They couldn't deal with it because suddenly they had a conflict between, okay, it looks like something normal, but it is not at all. So they felt at home and not at home in the same time, and that was a big irritation, and that they had to stop every time. And that was a big lesson for me, because it means that sometimes even if you don't change a lot, you can change the whole attitude of musicians or the whole perspective of a music.
I wanted to ask, again about this amorphosis. Would you consider this, because you composed it in different years, like in a span of some years, and would you consider this as a timeline with your approach in transformation, or does it matter?
I think my way of dealing with this music changed during the process. That means the last three movements, what I showed you, the last example on the PowerPoint thing, this is one movement from the last three movements. The first one with the long sustained notes is earlier, more 5 years earlier. I think I became more courageous. I attacked Bach more in the end. Somehow it was also because it was such a long process. In a way, I wanted to get rid of it. So I wanted to stress it more, let's say. Because you work on it in different ways, and then you see, okay, it's working. But then I didn't feel so content, and I thought, okay, I have to do more. The funny thing is that, of course, like always, when you see two boxers, and one is attacking, the one attacking is making the other stronger. So somehow I was supporting Bach more, and I don't mind, and I think he doesn't mind too. Anyway, we are partners in this. This is an interesting thing, yeah. But it changed a bit, yes. But I think it is, of course, the longer you do things like this, and of course I'm not only doing this, I'm also composing pieces without, which are compositions and not transcompositions, of course I get more and more experience, and I lose some experience because I get older. So I sometimes, when I look at pieces I wrote in the 90s, I look at the scores and I think, who wrote this piece? I don't know anymore. So because I know every idea I had in this piece, but I'm no longer close to these ideas. I still know them, but I somehow lost contact. And I think it's not I don't feel sad about it. It's just a normal process. So I just go on, and I think approaching again another piece by another composer means something different. I even, to answer your question in a radical way, I decided maybe 2 years ago not to do transcompositions in a moment, to do other things. And that doesn't mean coming back to composition and becoming a classic contemporary music composer again. I'm much more interested in other things. That, for example, I have a project in the moment, and I'm going to work with a singer from Mali, a pop singer from Mali. She's a black singer, and with some instruments from Mali, and we're going to do a project together. So to answer your question about what happens in North America, I feel very strongly the need to open up my mind in new perspectives, and I don't know how it is going to be, but I want to step out a bit of this classic music context, because I think it's necessary. Otherwise, we are always in the gated community, let's say, and I don't feel so comfortable there. So that's why I think working with Rokia Traoré, the singer from Mali, will be a very good experience for me, and I'm thinking very much about it, how to avoid to be the white guy in this game, how to open up my mind, or just to wait what's going to happen. This is something which is I'm much more interested now than to write another orchestra or ensemble piece.
I think that's very important now that even the question of composing and composing contemporary, composing new, has very much been problematized. It has been part of our discussions within this platform. These things that we have been, and even the transcomposition and transformation of composer itself, I think is very much conflicted with each other. And well, in my case, and I would like to believe also in AJ's case, it's a political transference, because like AJ's projects with the Kundiman, for example, which we would like to label as transcomposition, actually politically uses the imagery of the 1920s and the 1930s, when these old Filipino songs were composed, bringing with it the imagery of the romanticists of the 19th century. And then AJ, I'm just talking about AJ, AJ destroying, not really destroying, but transforming that harmonic gestalt into a political statement, for example, with pollution or the tension. And I think it's a very political way of addressing this notion of transcomposition. I love this word now. I mean, it's a new word I learned, transcomposition, but I think every composition is a transcomposition. I'd like to go back to this later as a case in point, because if Beethoven composes a sonata, it's not really a change of style, but a change of schema. He transforms the schema into a different perspective also, or if you compare the development from CPE Bach to Haydn, to Robert Schumann, that would also be some kind of a transference of schemas. But the way I understand transcomposition is this deliberate um, overdetermined, let's say, overdetermined notion of creating something from something older, but injecting yourself in there, or your political ideals, or your notions, or your modernity. That's why this notion of transcomposition, I think we should explore further, because it actually tells us about ourselves now, what we are now, which we do not understand fully yet, but which is reserved for the future to look back to. Okay, these people, Johannes Schöllhorn in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, was doing this, or and this is actually tells us about how multi-layered and multicultural and whatever our lives is now. So that's how I look at this transcomposition phenomenon. I think it's
Well, I think we live in very strange and very new times. That means we live in a time. Well, I grew up, you grew up, maybe too, without internet. So when I was somehow in your age, some of your age, I still didn't know what internet is. So I know the time before, and I know this.
we're the same age, Johannes.
Yes,
I'm 1 year older than you are.
yeah. So you know this without the internet, and you know it completely. And then as it is really a big change, and also the what we call globalization is a big change in too. In it's related, but it's also something else, because now we traveled not in the moment, but we used to travel a lot around, and a lot of contacts were suddenly possible, which were absolutely impossible before, or let's say they were possible, but very much slowed down because everything took much more time. Now we can speak together. You're sitting in the Philippines and in Canada, and we are sitting in Germany, and we can speak to each other. This was impossible 20 years ago. And that has advantages and it has disadvantages, because this big machine in internet, of course, gives us hundreds and millions of new information, but it's also in the same time reducing information in a very strong sense. And that means it's standardizing a lot of things which were not standardized, and we lose a lot of aspects. And also the problem is that because we are always everywhere connected 24/7, we tend also to lose the sense for time. That means for what is the past time, what is the future, and what is the present, and what is the role of these things, and how can we deal with this. So one of the ideas of transcomposition is also to make people aware again. Okay, where do things come from? What are their origins, or how not? It's not necessarily that they have to be true, but it's just to point out there is history, and that because if we don't think about history, how could we think about future? Because I think one problem, because you said modern times, one problem of modernism is it is always aiming into the future, and it is somehow became an attitude, but it's no longer meaningful. So especially in contemporary music, we have this tendency, oh, we are always modern. We are the ones who always have new ideas. But we don't have. But then there is the tendency that we pretend to have new ideas, but we don't have them always. And what is new is not so simple. It's not so easy to say. So because then there is also the tendency that we're creating objects which look new, but are they new always? No, they're not. Sometimes they're very old-fashioned looking objects, and they might be the much more important ones. And I think the work I did with these transcompositions is very much about, okay, opening a perspective which we might lose. It has also to do with thinking about Kowaiski and Pierrot. this has a very German aspect, because Kowalski was Jewish and he had to leave the country. And this music was kind of forgotten. So it was also the way to bring this music back to life, but not in the museum style. That means singing the songs with piano, but bringing them to life and to give them something new in life by adding something. Okay, maybe it's not in the sense of Kowalski, but what can I do? Yes.
Well, in a certain way, I see this attitude actually like in a two-way process. Going back to what I thought about in Animal Force, for example, when we actually make things appear by disappearing and making things disappear by appearing. So in a sense, like this attitude in transcomposition kind of like highlights that that I don't know if they're actually contradictory, but I would say like a multi-directional trajectory where we actually make things appear by making it disappear in our gaze, and at the same time we also make it disappear by making it the foreground and all of that. But I was also wondering, like, even conflating transcomposition with this idea of anamorphosis again. Maybe just like to circle back with your work too. It's just like maybe it's also a naive thinking on my part anyway. But is it safe to say that it's that transcomposition will always be analogous to anamorphosis? In the same way that interpretation can also be seen that way, that the idea of interpreting one work.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure if I understood the question or the point exactly.
Well, it's really just because, like, going back to this decentralization, where everyone can actually like think about different perspectives and
Yeah.
making it all occur at the same time.
Yeah.
Right.
I think maybe my confusion, or maybe the confusion, is that we cannot treat the words on the same level or in the same way. I think transcomposition is a word which means a kind of a way of dealing with existing music, or recomposing or composing on the basis of existing music. I think the word anamorphose is more. First, it's a title of this piece, and it's a special way to approach this piece. I would not call all my pieces by nature anamorphoses. I would not say that. Of course, it has relations, because if I work on a music by another composer, I have no choice. Of course, I have to deal with my perspective, because otherwise I'm not doing anything. But I would not call it anamorphose in this way, because I think the point anamorphose, or this title, works well because of what I explained in the case of Bach. It is always the same soggetto, and he is also looking at his own soggetto in different ways. So I just took this way and made a kind of prolongation of this pre-existing way of working, or the way of working Bach did it. This is not the case in every piece I'm working, or I was working on.
I think it's in a way in this way we actually like also put some certain limits also on what transcomposition is. I think I'm more also concerned about like putting the boundaries then. So also just like thinking about like what is transcomposition, what is not transcomposition.
The problem is also one point is what you do, and the second is how you talk about it, and the third point is how you talk about it in a Manila Composers Lab. That means you have people in front of you and you try to present something. But when I compose, I'm not thinking of how am I going to present this music. So the problem is that we need words to try to fix certain aspects of our work. And of course, these words are never perfect. It's like I'm as if I've become the music theory teacher of my own music. Or the musicologist of my own music. In fact, that is not my job. but I have to do this job very often, and all of you have to do this job too. And then the confusion is always coming. And of course, I think, on the other hand, I think it's necessary that we try to do this, because it sometimes also cleans up our minds. Because when I when I realize that a certain word does not work well, then I can see, okay, something in my mind is not working well. But yeah, we have to be a bit careful with words, because all the words have the nice tendency to generalize. And I want to, this is maybe related to central perspective, but I want to refuse this tendency of generalization a bit. But we have to deal with this. Without words, nothing is possible.
I think words are just like they just bring ideas like schemas. If you have a word, it gives you an idea of what it is, but of course you can always challenge what it is. And I think it's constantly a dynamic thing. It's an ambivalent thing. It changes every place and every time. And what I want to say was what I think of transcomposition is how a composer in using an older material brings out himself. I mean, I'd still see the composer Johannes in Anamorphose or in Max Kowalski's Pierrot as the central figure and only tackling that material. So we see Kowalski, or maybe we see Bach in that case in the eyes of Johannes, in that sense. That I think is the significance to me of transcomposition. Or if we listen to Spalinger, he has Adieu Mamour, which is a tribute to Dufay, this duet for cello, and you see Spalinger there. Spalinger, we see Dufay in the eyes and the ears of Spalinger, or to go as far maybe as Webern's orchestration of Bach's Ricercare. That to me is a transcomposition, because it's more significant to see Webern's structural perspective than Bach's structural perspective in that respect. Or we could if see a Chicoria playing All the Things You Are, this song, the standard, you hear Chicoria and not Jerome Kern, really, in that sense. And that in a sense is transcomposition, which actually brings me to the orality of musical tradition, of musical practice, not because it's orally transmitted, but because even in the writing there's a certain orality, this certain transformation from one person to another of a phenomenon. That is what I call orality. So that if you put a political perspective, that is part of that orality. I think this transcomposition thing will go a long way. That's my prediction in the next generations to come, because we are beginning to question even ourselves, our places, our perspectives itself, and the centrality of Europe, which was a 19th century Darwinian phenomenon. How evolution was actually telling us also in a way that the development is centralized in Europe from the outside, and I think we are now questioning that very notion. And I think this transcomposition has the great potential to be what the future might become, because we are beginning to acknowledge who we are, where we are, what we are. I think now that's my opinion. That's why I find it very significant.
Sometimes it's interesting a discussion is interesting, and it's also interesting to ask the question, why are we discussing this? That means, why are we discussing this? I think you mentioned the 19th century, and I think especially the second half of 19th century is very important for the time why we are still discussing about this. It is the question, where is it a piece by Bach or is it a piece by Johannes Schöllhorn and so on? This question is only important when somebody is thinking there is a conflict between these two guys. And I think it's not necessarily a conflict, because I think there is no conflict between Joseph Haydn and Beethoven using the sonata form. It's no problem that, but Beethoven knows that he is using the sonata form by Haydn, and there is no conflict. But we have a certain way of thinking, and I think it's very strong. It's not only the thinking in contemporary music. Contemporary music is somehow more the prolongation of a tradition before, because it is the question of ego, my expression, the ich, the I, who is talking. And it's also the discussion about the genius. That means the one person who has ideas and the others don't have ideas. So if I think as a composer, okay, I am the one who is expressing only myself, only my feelings, what is inside of me, I have to tell everybody outside. Of course, I am never doing a piece on music by Johann Sebastian Bach. No, he would be just in the way. I kick him out because I want to say my things. Okay. But I think we are no longer in the time that we should behave like this. It was very funny. I did another piece, kind of a transcomposition on a melodrama by Massenet. And then I got a comment after this performance, and someone told me, and I know that I changed a lot in this piece. Well, first I changed the orchestration. That means from piano and voice to big orchestra and voice. And I did a lot in this piece. And then I got one nice, interesting comment after the performance. Someone told me, Massenet wins. And I said, and that was very interesting for me, because I never felt that I'm in a contest. And it was never my idea. I even didn't think about, okay, should I express my ideas? I just had the desire to use this music and to do something which is very much salon music. It sounds a bit like, let's say, big band with strings and things like that. And I enjoyed this very much. I enjoyed, so to say, to help Massenet to make this music much more brilliant, much more enjoyable. Okay, if it's just an orchestration, I don't mind, but I never felt to be in a contest. And that is maybe shows the different attitudes. And I absolutely agree. I think we should forget in a way our egos, and we need other people to express ourselves. Why not other composers? We need listeners to, otherwise music doesn't exist. If my music is not listened by anybody, it doesn't exist. So I need the listener. So it is also in the listener. It's not only on my paper. I need musicians. I need all these translators. This is the wonderful thing of music. We need a lot of people. It's sometimes tiring, but it's a good thing too. And that's why I think, okay, let's forget a bit about the ideas of the genius and that I have the idea and someone else doesn't have it. How do we know, by the way? That does not mean that we don't have ideas and that we are not able to do things. That's not a black and white decision or something like this. It's not.
We had actually a lot of things to talk about. And do we still have questions, though, among our panel?
I have one question, just out of interest. Just out of nowhere. In those images that you showed of anamorphotic things, you always showed this transition because that's one of the things that makes them interesting. That you have a clear subject and then you step away a bit and you don't have a clear subject anymore, or you see something else that might be just as interesting. But when you showed the score of something that was very, very, very fragmented, it didn't sound very fragmented. And I was wondering, were you tempted to show that disparity more of how fragmented it actually is, as opposed to how it sounds.
Well, I didn't think about the anamorphosis when I chose these examples, and I could go on. And it is also important to see the whole thing. I just showed you 8 bars of the beginnings, so it's not always representative. Of course, it's both. That means it is like the nice word deconstruction. It is both. It is destruction and it is construction. And that means they have to come together. And if you're lucky, it creates a nice tension, because you have something which is cut in 1,000 nice pieces, and somehow it works still as one piece. So it has 2 perspectives. That's what I was interested in. And what is also important, of course I could deconstruct the pieces by Bach more, but I want to leave the original, or the original piece somehow in its shape, because if I don't do so, you lose the contact to this world. And the idea of the music is exactly in between. That means you have to understand the original, otherwise you don't understand what I'm doing. This is a kind of an oscillation process between these things. So the music is not either there or there. It is in the constantly changing dialogue between both of them. That's why I have to why I always say I have to support somehow the composers I am deconstructing, because otherwise you lose the relation. We know there are so many transcompositions or transformations of pieces, and you don't realize the original. So if you lose it, why is it there? But I'm thinking of the listener. I think that if the listener somehow can memorize where it is coming from, it's useful, because then I can create this game between the worlds. That's the reason. Not about fuzzy and clear. It's not this way. Yeah.
So you see the deconstruction, the fragmentation, as opposed to your recognition of the Bach work. Is that what you meant?
No.
No. Okay, sorry. I completely misunderstood.
I don't reflect so much on what I am doing in this moment. I just do it. And then sometimes I'm surprised. This was the approach. Yeah. No, I'm not so intellectual in this process when I'm working. It is more that I listen to a fragment or a phrase from Bach, and then something is exploding in my mind. So, and then my brain tries to bring it in order again. I'm not very much content with its explanation, but it's quite close, I think.
Makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, but maybe I've already answered it, but I just want to ask it again. What for you is transcomposition, which is kitsch? Which is a kitsch?
Well, we should talk about what kitsch is in this case, because that we have 2 aspects. We have the aspect of transcomposition, and then we have the aspect of kitsch. And talking about kitsch means also talking about non-kitsch. So what makes the difference between kitsch and no kitsch? Well, in the piece I mentioned with Masne, the idea was to come as close as possible to kitsch, but not so that everybody has the notion of kitsch, but it is not kitsch. Because kitsch for me is interesting, but I don't want to create kitsch. That means kitsch is something which pretends to be bigger than it is. And that's not my idea. So I'm much more interested, if one can say, I'm interested in bad taste, let's say. And then I'm interested in the question, why do we call this bad taste? And is it really bad taste? So the categories which define this being bad taste or not bad taste. That's what I'm interested in. But yeah, or let's say it in different words. I don't fear so much kitsch. I don't fear it. Because I think a lot of people try to avoid being kitschy. But this is maybe not a discussion about my work, but it's more.
Yeah, actually, so I wasn't asking about, for example, for your work, but
Yeah.
how you would perceive it if you hear other pieces which would fall in this transcomposition category.
Kitsch, if they are kitsch, then I would say they are kitsch. What can I say? It depends of the example.
I think kitsch will always be kitchen anyway.
Yeah, I have to admit I'm a bit lost with the question as well, because whether something is kitsch or not has very little to do with whether it's transcomposition or not, isn't it? I mean, it could be completely original according to what they think, but it could still be kitschy according to how I see it.
Well, I think I can imagine pieces which are transcompositions and kitschy. Of course, there are hundreds of millions of these pieces. I know. So I think it's always, but this is very much in general. I think it's always a question how people use the elements of music or the tools in music. It is not a question of this, if this tool is a good one or a bad one, because every tool can be used in different ways. If I want to drive a nail into the wall, I don't take a saw, I take a hammer. So the hammer is the good tool in this case, but the saw is for something different. And I think kitsch can be very, very useful, or a kitschy piece can be incredibly beautiful. A lot of composers play with kitsch, maybe more than we think. But it depends of the situation or of the piece.
All right.
Is that an answer?
Yes, yes.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Yeah. I think it's actually time to end the discussion for today. And so we actually like to thank Johannes Schöllhorn for joining us for today's episode. Props to you, yes. And please, for our viewers, just continue to tune in as we actually come up with more episodes in the future. So have a good day and be safe out there.